Hi, my name is Sean Connor Anderson, and welcome to episode 2 of A Righteous Journey. Today's episode is titled, Unbind Him, Let Him Go, in reference to the story of Jesus raising his friend Lazarus from the dead in John 11. Before we get to the video, let's check out this week's glossary. When it comes to returning citizens, what is our role and responsibility as brothers and sisters in Christ? If everyone is a sinner, if none of us can stand righteous before God on our own, then how do we respond to those who have been branded unrighteous or unworthy by society? How does our language shape our reality? In this episode, Desmond and Neil unpack this and more for us. Let's get into it.
First and foremost, when Jesus said, so much as you have done to the least among you, that's what you've done to me, right? And you couple that with 1 Corinthians 13, that talks about, though I speak with the tongues of men and angels, if I don't have love, then all of that is just a waste of time, right? At the end of the day, you know, our relationship with God is kind of conditional, right? And basically, what it's saying is that, well, if you want a good relationship with me, right, then you have to be willing to have a relationship with the people who you despise the most.
Wow.
Right? Whether it's that prostitute, whether it's that drug addict, whether it's that returning citizen. If you can't find it in your heart to love them, then how can you claim to love me? Right? Because your relationship with me is dependent on your relationship with them. Right? And 1 Corinthians 13 tells you that if you don't know how to love, then everything that you're doing, all of the pomp and pompous, that you're engaged in, all of the rituals that you engage in is meaningless. It's meaningless unless you have love in your heart for people who you despise. And, so those scriptures, it empowers me, right, to have any kind of conversation I want to have with any person of faith, right, and to speak on the conditions of authority. We have, I like to tell folks that there is, we've all said the Lord's Prayer, right, but a lot of people don't realize that there's a contractual element in the Lord's Prayer. It starts with salutation. Right? It starts with adoration. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Right? But it gets to this part in the Lord's Prayer that we all say, where it says, forgive us for our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, or forgive us for our debts as we forgive our debtors, which basically is saying that, God, we want you to forgive us for what we've done wrong, but only if we're willing to forgive the people that has wronged us, right? And so that person that may have committed a crime and has transgressed against society or us, if we're not willing to forgive that transgression of a returning citizen, if we're not willing to want to advocate and fight for their right to vote, for their right for economic mobility, for their right to have safe and affordable housing and education and to live with dignity and respect, then we don't deserve your love and your forgiveness, God. It's a contractual element. And so I love those verses.
Yeah. That's powerful. And I'm reminded of the story of Lazarus. So, somewhat famously, right? So Jesus resurrects Lazarus from the grave. He comes out and he says something very curious. And you wonder why Jesus didn't just take care of this on his own. But once he calls Lazarus forth, he says to the people around him, he says, unbind him and let him go. So there was a community part of the engagement of Lazarus's full freedom. He had come out of the grave, but he was still in grave clothes. And here's Jesus telling the people there, unbind him, let him go. And so my next question is kind of along these similar lines, because there's people I'm sure who would say, well, if these people who were formerly incarcerated, if they paid their debt to society, then Don't they just have their rights back? Don't they just have freedom to do what any citizen would do? And so I'm curious to know, what did you guys find, and maybe from your own journeys or from the stories of people that you're hearing who are coming out of incarceration? What is the difference between what the freedoms an average citizen would enjoy on a regular basis and those that a returning citizen? What's the gap there?
Yeah, there's a huge gap there, and they're called collateral consequences, right? Some of these issues are not brought up in the courtroom while you're getting sentenced or while you're talking to the judge and some of the other public officials there, but it's very real world consequences that people with a conviction have to face as they're returning to the community. Access to employment. There are jobs that aren't available to people because of their past convictions. Access to housing. There are a lot of places that people with convictions can't live. Access to opportunity just in general, whether that's getting credit to start your own business or to access to higher education. There are hurdles and barriers that exist into all of those systems. And I think a lot of people, like you said, don't necessarily understand that that is a part of the process and that it's actually the moment. It's a Lazarus moment, right? Where where people need to be able to take something that was dead and put it to the side and begin again and live again. And that moment is a moment that we found is very crucial to the reentry process. The ability to get access to employment at exactly the moment you most need it. Not 7 years later, not 5 years later, not more punishment that never was a part of the contract with the judge. Those are the kind of things that are very important for people to understand. And so I appreciate the question, but though we see that the light switch goes off and suddenly you have somebody who didn't know how the system worked to being an advocate to help change the system.
So they're the precursor to that, right? to that difference, right? And it rests in the mindset, okay, right? It rests in the narrative, right? Because first of all, right, how are we identified, right? Ex-felons, ex-cons, returning citizens, right? What actually separates me from everyone else, right? At the end of the day, we're all children of God. We're all human beings, right? First and foremost, but people with a felony conviction, right, are forced to wear a scarlet letter of shame for the rest of their lives. No one is walking around saying, I'm an ex-liar, or I'm an ex-adulterer, or I'm an ex-fornicator, right? Yeah. No one is saying that, right? But we have to walk around with that tag, and that tag creates an environment in which there are going to be like stark differences, right, and challenges that is faced by people with a criminal history or with a felony conviction. And so I think it really starts, right, with how we identifying folks. Now, let me tell you, we're not there yet, right? We're using returning citizens to bring some dignity, right? And then across the country, folks are using other terminologies, maybe like justice impacted people, right? But we need to get to a place to where we're just people, right? And when we're just people, then a lot of those barriers or a lot of these policies, right, would not necessarily be policies that people would even embrace. But like, wait, would we stand for a person not being able to work where they want to work or live where they want to live or be able to participate in democracy, right? No, right? But it's okay if that person is an ex-felon or a felon or a convict, right? And that shouldn't be so. And so the stark differences start with how we're first looking at somebody. What is it that you see when you see me? When you meet me for the first time and you have no idea about my history, you're viewing me and you're treating me just like your regular, everyday human being. It isn't until after you find out then that I have a history, then those views kind of shift and your empathy shifts.
When I hear our vote, our voice, our time, here's what that means to me. Our vote is personhood. It tells me I'm a citizen, a part of a fabric of a democracy, a society who chooses their elected leaders to carry out the will of the people, for the people, by the people. Our voice means power. It means that just by the stroke of a pen or the push of a button, the sending in of a ballot, I can move the agenda of a nation forward or backward by the choice that I make. Our time says purpose to me. That far more than just Democrat or Republican, progressive or conservative, that the season, the era, the epoch of time is so important, so vastly important, that the choice I make could literally change the sway, the flow, or the ebb of an entire generation.
It's time for a new course,
a new coalition,
A new leadership. Somebody.
Got to rise above race.
Rise above sex.
a new leadership,
a choice,
A chance.
Don't cry about what you don't have.
use what you got, your right to vote.
Nuestro voto
es nuestra voz y es el tiempo de hacer cambios.
Our vote.
Our voice.
Our time.
Lots of food for thought in this episode. As you head into discussion time, consider how you and your community can hear the voice of Jesus and respond to create Lazarus moments for others. How can you interact with those society has discarded, perhaps even individuals you don't want to interact with? How can you identify collateral consequences that are holding back the brothers and sisters around you? And how can you shift your language to reflect the redemptive work God is doing in all of us? This is application time, so dive in deep. Thank you. We'll see you in the next episode.